Hello again, and we are up to episode 18 in what must now seem to you to be a never-ending series of these things, but we're back. A lot of sanding has gone on since the last episode. Both of the fuselages now have been filled several times and sanded several times because you'll never get it all in one go, and don't even try, because if you do, you'll start changing the shape of the fuselage. You want to fill the divots and you want to get a smooth finish, but you don't want to change the shape that you worked so hard to achieve. You want to leave that intact. Now, since we were here last, I've added the plywood firewall, and that was easily done. Just cut out a circle, but I do want to show you one thing. The firewall, if you'll notice, is, whoops, don't want to drop this, the firewall is inside the edge of the foam. Foam is out here, firewall is in set by about, a 1/16 of an inch. And the reason for that is, or will become evident later when we start working on the cowl and getting the cowl. I don't want to have two supposedly identical models that require different cowls because of small differences in the diameter of the nose. So both of these were cut out of 1/16 inch ply, and they were stacked one on top of the other and cut out on a jigsaw. You can use coping saw, jigsaw, bandsaw, anything to cut a circle, and both were cut out at the same time. And these have been epoxied on. Now, they have not been drilled yet. There'll be a hole will be drilled in here for the motor lead wires. Now, I've never found it necessary to drill any cooling holes. In these models, I've just never had a problem with heating the speed control or the receiver, and they just haven't been all that hot. Again, these are flown like scale models. They're not out there hanging on their prop looking like a helicopter. But there's where we are for now. We're sanded, and we're going to then, or next, start worrying about the empennage, the tail section back here. And I've got a couple of clips. This is going to be really fast. I had a couple of clips, and they'll show how we go about cutting out the horizontal vertical stabilizers. That'll take about 5 seconds. And after that, I believe I want to add a small blurb here about vacuum forming, because we're going to be cutting the wing core and not vacuum forming, let me back up, vacuum bagging. We're going to be cutting the wing core and vacuum bagging the wing core for at least one of these models. And don't let that scare you away, because I'm about to show you a way to make a vacuum bag setup for 25 bucks by converting an aquarium pump. And it's so dead easy to do. Plus, it's perfect for vacuum bagging this lightweight 1 pound or 1.5 pound density white foam. Now, I've got several, as a matter of fact, vacuum pumps, but the one for this lightweight white 1 pound to 1.5 pound density foam, if you use one of the full-size pumps, it'll crush it like crushing a beer can. These need very little vacuum, somewhere along between like 5 and 6 inches of mercury. And every inch of mercury is equal to about 2.5 psi. So you can do the math. Very little suction will put a tremendous amount of pressure on these things. So, but we'll go into that a little bit deeper when we start talking about the bagging itself. And I'd like to show you how to convert a simple aquarium pump into a constant run diaphragm vacuum pump. Okay, well, we'll get to that too. Then we're going to bag. The reason why I want to introduce that now instead of later is that some of these sections here are going to be vacuum bagged and before they're actually attached to the fuselage, and then the fuselage will be glassed. At least that's the one, at least the one that's going to be covered with glass. So we're at the stage where at least the glassed portion of the horizontal and vertical stabs are going to have to be glassed, and I'm going to bag them because it makes a much better part. So here we go. Thanks for sticking around. One of the fastest things to do in this whole project is to cut out the horizontal and vertical stabilizer. It's very easy to do. We've already developed the templates. As you see here, we've got the horizontal stabilizer, vertical stabilizer. That template in the back is for the wingtip, which we will get to later. But these we're going to cut out of a product that you get at the Dollar Tree store, Dollar Tree foam board. This stuff is very easy to work with. It's very lightweight, and it has two good surfaces once you peel off the paper. This comes coated with a paper coating. Now, this is very low quality foam board, thank goodness, because the paper comes off easily. And if you don't take it off, it's going to come off anyway. First time you get it wet, it's coming off. But if you take it off, you're left with two nice surfaces here. This one's got a ding or two, but we're going to use it. But it comes in large sheets. I've got pieces of it laying around, so I'm going to cut mine out of these pieces. Now, one thing to notice, let me see if I can get this out here, is that this does have a grain. If you fold it one way, it will fold easily and readily. The other way, not so much. It's stiff. So if you take advantage of that in your parts, when you lay out parts on here, lay it out to take advantage of this stiffness, and you don't want your horizontal stabilizer doing this across the span. So you'll lay it out this way where you've got some stiffness. So I'll take just a moment, chop these out, and we'll be done with it. I don't know if this will be visible on camera or not, but you can see how frugal and how you can make use of the foam. It doesn't take very much. That's why this building's technique is so cheap. This can be cut out in just seconds and shaped to a semi-airfoil shape in just seconds, compared to doing the same thing in balsa. So I'll go ahead and cut these out and we'll take a look at it. Now, you might think, wow, that's some pretty thin board for a 36-inch model, but when you cover that on both sides with fiberglass, that's going to be more than strong enough. And we're also going to show a technique here called vacuum bagging. And before anybody runs screaming from the room saying, oh, you can't do that, I'm going to show you how to do it so inexpensively that it's unbelievable, with an aquarium pump. You don't need, I've got a $450 gassed pump over there that I use all the time. But I also have a $20 aquarium pump that's perfect for pulling down vacuum on these lighter foams. My big gassed pump, if I'm making a DLG wing or a 2-meter wing for a sailplane, yeah, I'll go ahead and we'll do the whole thing. But I'll show you how to use a $20 aquarium pump to do vacuum bagging, and you'll come out with great parts every single time. So we'll move on from here. I'll cut these out, and then we'll move on to the next step. I've already cut out the horizontal stabilizer, but I thought I'd take just a second and give you a little micro tip here about cutting these things out. I used a snap blade knife. I haven't used an X-Acto blade in decades. X-Acto blades have gotten to the point where they were no longer sharp. They were just a pain in the ass. They were expensive. Now I use the little 9mm snap blades and I'm happy. Anytime I need a new cutting edge, all I got to do is snap that off and I got it. But the tip I want to give you, when you are cutting curves in the board like this curve around the top here and down, well, anywhere around wing tips like I did with this, instead of trying to put the knife down, you see, instead of trying to put the knife down and following it along in a smooth and a curve like that, that's just hard to do, and it also tends to wad up the foam underneath it. So instead of doing that, make a series of straight cuts all the way around, staying outside of your guidelines, all the way around the curved segment, just like that. And then when you get down here, you can make your straight line, and then on these gentle outward curves you can come on out. Now that leaves a couple of facets here, but with about that many strokes, you're done, and you've got a nice, perfect, smooth curve. Okay, that just helps you, keeps you from wadding up. Sometimes when you try to cut through, and foam, believe it or not, will dull a blade pretty quickly. So sometimes when you're cutting through, you'll notice that it starts to kind of wad up on the bottom, maybe a little bit like that. Yeah, like that. And you don't want to do that. So cut straight line segments instead of trying to drag it through, and then just sand it to shape very quickly. Just thought I'd throw in that little tip. Before we go any further with bagging these parts, vacuum bagging the tail parts, there is one other thing that we need to do, actually two other things. What we're going to do is line the face of the cutouts for the, here we go, let me move this apart. There we go, see it a little bit better. We're going to line these faces here and here with some balsa. Now this is just strips of hard balsa that I've cut out. It's 3/16 inch thick hard balsa cut into 4mm strips. And yes, I know I'm mixing units there because unfortunately in the US you can't buy balsa in metric units. So 3/16 inch balsa, but it's cut 4mm wide, and we're going to do two things here. We're going to run one all the way across from tip to tip, and that will do two things. It will help stiffen the horizontal stabilizer, and it will also give us some material here to drill for hinges, whatever sort of hinges that you'd like to do. Then after we get this one inserted along the entire edge there from tip to tip, we'll take sections of another one and line the front, just the front. Oops, there we go. The front of these. Now, of course, you're going to have to remove some material, some foam material, but that's self-evident and obvious. So let me get these pieces of balsa inserted, and then we'll do a real short discussion about how to shape these, both the horizontal and vertical stabilizers. We're not going to just go crazy trying to make an airfoil out of a flat piece of foam, but we are going to round the leading edge and taper the trailing edges somewhat, and I'll show you how we're going to do that here in just a moment. And here is the glue up for inserting this 4mm wood strip here in the trailing edge. Actually, it goes all the way across the back of the horizontal stabilizer, and we've got the same 3/16 thick by 4mm wide strips on the leading edge of the elevators. Now those will all be sanded flush, and they will be plenty strong enough to hold any sorts of hinges that you might want to use. They'll have to be sanded flush. They're just a little bit proud of the surface right now, but that will only take a few swipes with a sanding bar and it'll be all done. Now I will glue up the second one in the same manner, and then we'll move along. Okay, as I've mentioned before, we've got to finish up the horizontal and vertical stab before we can do much more on the fuselage, because these have to be attached before we start covering the fuselage, and we're going to vacuum bag at least one set of these. But before we do, I just wanted to show you this is what it looks like after you complete lining. There we go. After you complete lining the elevators and you've put a 4mm strip of balsa through this to act as a stiffener somewhat, it'll be plenty stiff enough once it's covered. But once you've done this, that will give you some wood there to actually do your hinging with, which will make it easier. You can hinge with foam too, but they're more robust if you hinge into wood with whatever type of hinges that you prefer. I will probably be using fishing line hinges on these, and I'll show you about that later. Monofilament fishing line that's roughed up and merely inserted into holes with regular alpactic glue. What I wanted to show now, rough shaping on these. These do not have to be shaped. This will be, of course, the vertical stabilizer. They don't have to be shaped to any particular airfoil. We'll just use the sort of round over by eye method. Also here along the trailing edge, I'm using the same. This is the drywall 220 grit drywall sander, and it works foam just perfectly, and it's nice and flat. You do have to keep the foam supported though, otherwise you're really going to have a problem. But all you have to do is just move this up and down the area that you want thinned, and it just goes away. It's almost like using a pencil eraser. Now I've got various other sanding tools here. By the way, if you have a 3D printer, you can go on Thingiverse and various places on the web and download these. This is my own design. I need to put this up on my Thingiverse site, where I've got some more stuff here we'll talk about later. But these hold, this one is again holding the 3M 220 grit fine grid sandpaper or drywall sander, and this is holding a piece of a 1-inch belt sander belt, and this is 80 grit. You might be surprised at just how heavy a grit you can actually work foam with, and it still does quite well. As long as you're not too heavy-handed with it, it won't chew it up. What I'd like to show here, I've got to do another stroke or two. It doesn't take very much. And we're not going to bring this trailing edge back to a feather edge. Feather edges are, it's just not necessary, and they are fragile, even if covered with fiberglass. Let me show you what I'm getting at here, if this will focus. This is the unsanded and sanded versions right here. Let's see if we can get this up there. Move that across. This sanded edge, and just flip it over back and forth and use those sanding blocks like I showed you, will come down to about a 30-second. You just want just a slight flat there. This is the unsanded edge and shows you how thick it is to begin with. So what we're going to do, let's try it this way too. How's that? Maybe that will be even better, huh? Get it up here where it's against my shirt, you can see. Okay, well, that's what we're aiming for. And I'm going to sand all of these pieces, the ones that are going to be covered by fiberglass and the ones that are going to be covered by the paper glue method. I'm going to do the same thing with the horizontal stabilizer. I will round the leading edge and then taper off the trailing edge. And again, I'm not going to get too religious about it. It's just got to be shaped where it's pleasing to the eye. We're not building a museum scale model here. So that's where we are, and as I said, we've got to finish these pieces so that we can bag a couple of them before we can actually put them on the fuselage and go any further. We'll bag some. I've got a roll of paper here that we're going to use to cover one set with paper, and both of those techniques will come up in just a moment. I was intending to at least begin the vacuum bagging portion of this series in this video, but then it would be chopped up into more than one because it's going to take more time than I would like to put into this one. So as I'm sure all of you will be glad to hear, we're going to cut this one short, and I will begin the next video talking about vacuum bagging and how we're going to set it up very inexpensively, very easily, and how we're going to go about bagging some of our parts. So come around to number 19 that will be up next, and we'll talk about vacuum bagging a little more. Thanks for hanging around.